Hey everyone, and welcome back to another process walkthrough video. So this one's walkthrough is a little bit of a special one because these four images of this set that we are taking a look at today, here they are, is a set that I had created for a very dedicated class for Colossal. So for a bit of more context, for those of you who might be out of the loop, just to really quickly go through what this is about, is that I had created a one-time class that's about 50 hours or so, 40 plus hours for Colossal. And in that particular class, I demonstrated the full, complete breakdown and creation from initial ideation to final painting, all the way through for these four images, these four artworks. So in today's walkthrough video, I want to give my usual level of detail in explaining the challenges, the basic broad process, as you guys always know, and of course talk about some of my favorite parts and the most difficult parts of each drawing. So once again, we're not going to compromise on the usual level of detail I go through on these shorter bite-sized videos, but do keep in mind that, let's say, if you do fancy a more complex, a more full-length 40 plus hour tutorial on these, then feel free to check out the class on Colossal. I linked it below. Once again, right, this class I'm recommending it in a way because I'm happy with the class I have made. To give a full disclaimer, I'm not receiving additional royalties based on signups, so I have no incentive to tell you guys to purchase this expensive class. Rather than that, for those of you who find it a viable investment and would like to hear from me in a very long form manner, they may not be suitable for Patreon, a very more bite-sized type of context. Feel free to check out the class. So with the context out of the way and where these four images have come from and all that good stuff, let's talk about my good old painting process, challenges, and my favorite parts just as always. So let us begin with scene A, the very first scene. So for this scene, my basic breakdown as always is being shown here. Essentially, we begin with a very rough sketch, right, capturing kind of the essence of the piece, right, while still being a little bit weak on the fundamentals. Chances are, right, with difficult scenes like this, we're going to face situations where perhaps we do not get things right on the first try. Now, as I mentioned in the full class, right, with the help of lots of references, with the help of an extended ideation stage where we gather lots of references, process demonstrated as well in the class, right, we're able to use references, a set of ideas to craft a scene that is a lot more suitable to our needs. So for example, as you can see here, right, going from the initial sketch, which was basically to capture the overall perspective, the very rough bones, the skeleton of the scene, to something like this, right, where we have a basic sketch, and then from the sketch, we applied our good old values and a little bit of color on the character. So during the class, I had split this into multiple stages. Each one of these stages have about 10 hours or so, 8 to 10 hours or so, right? Accounting for all the four illustrations that I had made. Basically talking about the entire process, showcasing all of it, right? So once again, details, very deep details can be found in the class. But as always, I want to talk a little bit more about the interesting things, right, for our videos here, because I feel like, just talking about the same old process every time is a little bit boring. So one of the most interesting things that I have found about drawing this particular scene, especially at this stage, was that it was difficult to really capture the entrance of a convenience store in a convincing way, right? Because there was a mix of needs between just creating something that looks alright. For example, we just want to draw a scene that looks, very normal, nothing out of the ordinary, very readable, but there was also a need to create a scene that was a little bit more flavorful, right? For example, we do want items to be scattered around. We want a little bit of roughness to the area, or I don't want it to be too clean. So as you can see, my initial idea here was to really have a bunch of books laid out across the floor and have this sort of more haphazard layout. Now, as I soon found out, the issue was that given this particular setup, a difficulty that I faced was that it was difficult to kind of really portray this place as a shop. Now, of course, right, the sliding doors, the shopping baskets, they do their job in a way, but I just didn't feel like it had quite the right impact initially. So this was a type of, or rather, this was a situation where I was, having to go into problem-solving mode to really think about how do we fix things up. And so at this point in time, I actually continued painting, kind of trying to figure out the local colors, what blend of colors to use. Once again, right, in-depth details are going to be in the very, very long class. But either way, right, during the process of figuring out the local colors, which is a phase where we can, just mess around with colors in a very haphazard way because everything is not super locked down. It's alright to just experiment, to use big box of color to help yourself take a look at the drawing in a way, right, to figure out what does the scene look like, what are some areas that could use a bit more work, what are some areas that are doing fine, and all that good stuff. So in this particular scene, I had kind of unlocked this new idea that rather than having this sort of very open composition, right, we have scattered islands of different objects being placed around. What if we had used the scene to kind of contain the character to this corner, right? Having this shelf here, having this shelf here. Containing the character was a really eye-opening moment. I was like, hey, this idea could work. And you can see me have the eureka moment kind of in the class as well, right? Where I talk about how a lot of these things can happen in each stage, right? There's a flexibility to each of the stages. So this was one of the things that I want to tell you guys about as well, because this was one of the scenes that really troubled me. Out of these four, this one was one that initially I had an idea that I thought was pretty solid, because we all have those moments, right? Where we think, we're just going to draw a convenience store. Surely, there's plenty of references for this, what could go wrong? Surely nothing could go wrong. And unfortunately, partway through the drawing, now this is something I did not say during the class, was that I really was scratching my head, right? That's one of the difficulties of creating a more long-form content. You're kind of committing to it. In a way, right, I do want to, and I did talk about the organic process of, I do talk about in a sense, right, because you might not have watched the class yet. I do talk about the difficulties of having to, alter things on the fly, keep on figuring out things on the fly. But one thing I did not really mention in the class, because it may be not quite appropriate to kind of complain about the format in a very, joking way, of course, was that when you're committing to a more long-form content, you can't really show the true level of frustration, because of course, right, there's a level of structure to things, and of course that level of structure is very much present in the class. I once again want to reassure everyone that my efforts, I feel like, in the end have paid off. It's a very structured class as a process as a whole. But one of the difficulties was that in order to achieve that, I had to do a lot of background painting by myself. So there's one secret, Patreon exclusive secret that I'm sharing here, is that the sheer amount of painting on my own, right, before I could, kind of take a look at this and go, yeah, this drawing will work out. And then I go back and record the previous stage, because having that ability to sort of look into the future and figure things out, it was super helpful to give myself that confidence heading into each stage of the tutorial. Now, of course, right, I could have picked something easier. I could have picked a lot more of an easier scene that, was a surefire win. But I did want to challenge myself in a way, because, that's kind of the point of drawing, right? And kind of the point of creating all these different scenes, drawing all these characters, different scenarios. The point is to kind of find a bit of a challenge to create something that you just find interesting. So yeah, for the class, I wanted to really show the spirit of that. And in general, I just want to show the spirit of that, in most of my work, hopefully. That you guys can see. So for this particular scene, after sort of reforming the scene and painting ahead and struggling with all that, I was able to continue the tutorial. And yeah, one of the most fun areas of the process was actually drawing in all these little details, right? Of course, once again, dedicated chapters for that. I feel like I have to stop talking about the class so much, because not everyone may be, interested in too deep a dive of explanation, but, do pardon me, right? Because I've just spent about a month and a half with these 4 illustrations. So, kind of treat this as sort of like a director's commentary almost on both the drawings themselves and the kind of class creation process. And for those who are interested, maybe this could get you a bit more excited for the class as well. So for this particular stage, right, as I mentioned, I love drawing in the details, because this is the stage where your previous planning pays off. Because right here, right, we have very vague representation of what's going on. Clearly that's not going to fly, that's not going to work. But here things are starting to come into play. So during this stage, right, I really enjoyed kind of drawing in these small little details using, techniques that I mentioned before as well. Full disclaimer, right, these techniques are not like, arcane forbidden techniques, but you know, in the class I did have a more of a runtime, a longer runway to demonstrate them in a way that is I feel more easy to learn and to pick up, and more explained as well. But of course, right, the basic concept is very much the same. Use a series of items of varying sizes, hopefully with a patterned context, to create a full scene that is, well, layered in a sense of physical objects, right? It's the layers of physical objects in the scene, creating that level of depth, so that we can completely immerse ourselves, hopefully, as well as the viewer in the scene as a whole. So this was my attempt at it, as you can see here. This is the final scene where we have a bit more arrangement, you know, a bit more unevenness in the bottles of water, completion of these candies and products. We have the soap bar, kind of the electric socket bar, extension bar, all the different magazines. I had a blast drawing all the magazines here, right? Drawing the individual pages has never been something that was super exciting to me before, but actually during the process of creating this one, you know, it always kind of feels great to be vindicated on the fact that, hey, if you just spend a bit more time drawing in things the way they should be, right, very fundamental stuff, you are rewarded by just having something that looks, you know, pretty good, pretty decent. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how this piece turned out in the end. The process was definitely a bit of a challenging one, right? Because recording a class, the expectation is that, well, you know, you go about it in an organized manner, you know what you're talking about, and I swear I do, or rather I do limit myself to things that I do know what I'm talking about, so, you know, you can have a guarantee on that. But either way, right, it's a bit of a challenging process where you need a lot more confidence heading into each of the drawings, knowing in a sense that they will work out in a way that, you know, people can look at it. Yeah, you know, I felt like this was a pretty decent class. And in a way, right, that was a bit of a special type of pressure going on. Because, yeah, it's hard to describe, right? But it's kind of like a little bit of a new special type of pressure that made me, I feel like, perform beyond my usual levels of detail for this one. So yeah, once again, had a lot of fun creating this piece. Once again, the good old patterns, all these things that I love using, and I just, under the cooking pot pressure of the class, I guess, came together in a pretty decent way. I'm pretty happy with this. And as always, right, because I do want to keep these videos a bit more bite-sized, so, you know, people can take a look at them a bit easier, feel free to ask me any questions you have regarding this scene, this artwork itself, in the comments below. Once again, that offer is extended to everyone. Please feel free to just drop a comment if there's something specific about a certain part. Why did I use this option? Why did I use that option? Feel free to ask me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So once again, right, this is going to be my quick sort of breakdown for this particular scene. I know I focus a bit more on the interesting parts rather than, you know, the dry process, which I'm sure you've heard a million times. And you can find a more detailed version of that in the class once again. But either way, hopefully this has been a kind of interesting story I wanted to share with you guys on this particular scene. Some of the challenges, especially in drawing the raindrops as well, right? These are interesting in a way that I did not expect, right? A level of density, but not too dense. How far do we let the raindrops in? You know, all these things accumulated in a challenge that was, I wouldn't say too enjoyable, but it was certainly something that I was very satisfied with once I had finished it for the class. So once again, thank you for watching this video. Feel free to check out, and be sure to check out, the other 3 videos for the other 3 scenes that I created for this set. Yeah, once again, thank you for your support here, and I'll see you in the next video. And so, hopping over to scene B. So this second scene here of the set was a pretty satisfying one to have finished as well. So I mentioned how scene A, all the details came together. For scene B, once again, there's a lot of details to kind of take a look at, from these cookies to these candies to like these potato chips to these cereal boxes. All these items, you know, I really had a pretty good time drawing, transforming them into place, and just kind of working with these different products, putting them on shelves and drawing them in detail. Now, this particular scene was a pretty fun one to make, to be honest, and let me just share some of the fun parts. So because, you know, I'm kind of aware that I'm always talking about the gloomy parts of the drawing process, so let's talk about some of the fun parts, right? So the most fun part, I would say, is probably this stage, right? The most exciting part is probably tied, right? Let's say it's tied with the final stage and the very first stage, because the first stage is where your hopes and dreams come together. You think about how you want to make the scene into something that you really would love to draw, and was kind of like the initial idea. We have a character who came into the shop from the front, and now she's browsing all these goods, just checking things out. So this is the type of pose that I wanted to use, right? A more stern pose befitting this particularly kind of like a stern vibe character. Now, if you want to learn more, once again, right, a little plug, excuse me, for the class itself, where I talk a lot more about the in-depth ideation stage, because it kind of has the format, the long-form format that I can really use to, drone on about all the different things that we take into consideration and the full process. But for today's video, right, we're really going to talk about the fun part. So as I was saying, the first stage here is super fun because a lot of items here, our brains, in a way, kind of give ourselves a pass, right? For example, when we're drawing this shelf or drawing this second shelf, all the things on the back, right? Sure, we're leaving them very vague at this moment, but the reality is that as we're drawing this stage, right, we do not know how it turns out. So it's not like we have this stage to compare to, right? We're not drawing the draft with this exact image in mind. Now, we may have some vague idea that we want the scene to turn out this way, but, when we begin, right, all we can think about is, oh, let me imagine how the scene might turn out, right? This is the character. Okay, so these shelves, there's going to be the level of density that's going on here, right? There's going to be a cat involved somehow. There's going to be an opposing shelf here. Hopefully, you can include some interesting things here as well. And the fun part about this particular stage is really just designing the character's pose and allowing the simplicity of the pose and the complexity of the scene to kind of meld together in a way that is kind of natural, right? If you take a look at this, someone browsing something in the shop, I feel like it's one of those more quiet poses that I have not drawn in a while, but I also wanted to showcase in the class how quiet poses and nuanced poses, they can be really powerful in their own way. So this was kind of the intent behind this particular piece. Now, one of the more interesting things, and I do explore this in the class once again a lot more in depth, is how exactly do we fill in all these items, right? We can give them rough shapes, sure. There's a whole stage dedicated to this process that I talk a lot more about, but how do we really conceptualize in our minds, right, what goes into these shelves? And this is where the kind of idea of reference comes in, but the kind of reference is not quite as easy as you might expect. Because when you're looking for reference, right, they are very representative, they are very binary in a sense that they indicate one scene only. Right? If you look for a convenience store reference, you might find 5 different, 10 different, 50 different references, but each of them are only really specific to a single scene. Right? You can't expect one to just fulfill all your needs. And in that way, right, the challenge is really to figure out, okay, so how much of a regular convenience store here do we want? How much of a interesting convenience store with like all kinds of strange goods, makes it feel a bit more, antique in a way, a bit more ornate is a bit of a weird word to use. Maybe there's some absurdly or extraordinarily ornate items for display on the shelves, right? That sort of concept is something that I was kind of struggling with in a way during the drawing process. And once again, right, the full solution to that in the full detail is explained as well in the class. But hopefully I'm not underselling this particular process video, because I do think is a couple of interesting insights that I have not shared before. So with this particular scene, right, one interesting thing was how much of that, well, as I just mentioned, the special factor do I want? So it took me a while to explore in a way, and I decided that I wanted the back shelf and the left side to be things that are a bit more extraordinary, and on the right side, near the character, we're going to have some things that are, just generic food items, all that kind of stuff, and then things start to go backwards into the storage section of the store. Excuse me. So this particular layout was something that really excited me for the future of this particular piece. So as you can see here, right, I had gone from initial sketch where I was very pleased to this one, which was, it's kind of just part of the process, not emotionally speaking, not particularly, excited or down on the prospect of the piece. And this stage, the initial portion of this stage was probably also another fun part where lots of colors came in, and we figured out together how to put those colors where do we put them, what colors to choose, what sort of tones we can use to complement the character, and all that good stuff, right? But the difficulty is really going from this stage to this stage. I feel like this is the most painful part of the drawing process. It's in a sense a rigorous part that very much relies on your own fundamentals. There's not much theory that can really help you here, right? You already place things in the right place, you kind of know where things are going, you just need to paint it out. So this is one of those stages that, oh man, excuse me, that sometimes just feels so daunting because, you know, the job here isn't quite, you know, hey, just draw it one by one. You know, sometimes the process means, or rather the process comes to, hey, you know, like, instead of drawing it one to one with a real reference, you have to think about, what if we use a bit of a taller item here? What if it's a different type of item? Instead of a thing on a shelf, what about a couple of things in a fridge, right? What about, is it cling wrapped? Is it packaged in a, you know, in that plastic package? Does it come in a cardboard box? Is it a styrofoam box? What sort of colors do we use on the packaging, and how does all that come together to create a goal of a scene that looks like a mix between a regular store and something that's a bit, you know, it's a bit special, it's a bit of X factor. So this was part of the challenge, and of course another challenge was taking the character from this to this, right? The rough idea is there, and I do mention this in the class as well, in more detail of how this process exactly happens. You can check out the full painting process there as well. But the idea was that we really needed to take the character from this sort of stage to this kind of stage. And the difficulty really begins here, right? Because as you start to refine, you start to find errors. Like, okay, so this part is, the neck here is a bit too thick. Maybe there's a bit of error in the pose itself, right? How do the trapezius muscles form across this area of the body, right? What about the shoulder? Where does the shoulder blade come in? How far does it push the lats back? How does the collarbone fit into this picture, right? How does the jacket go with the character, right? The jacket or something that I had. And I challenged myself to kind of paint live. You know, it's not really that much of a challenge because I had to do it for the class, and I painted the jacket live and demonstrated how to sort of do it most of the way. Of course, a little bit of additional rendering for myself at the back. But the basic idea was that drawing the jacket in perspective with this sort of configuration, right, kind of had to account for some more identifiable features, for example, and just going through this process was definitely a challenging one. I really stretched my brain power to the max, and as well as with the challenge of explaining everything at a higher level cadence than, you know, this sort of more casual setting where we're just focusing on some of the challenges and interesting things. So another interesting thing was the tattoo of the character. So the tattoo of the character is not the main focus of the class, right? Because it's about cinematic illustrations, how to really plan for a scene and execute the scene, right? Specifically regarding a tattoo, right? I didn't really have the time in the class to share more about that. So, you know, I'm just going to do a little bit more sharing now. So for this tattoo, I really wanted to initially create a snake tattoo with that chrysanthemum flower design, which we see in a lot of tattoos, right? It's almost kind of overused in a way, but I'm not going to pretend it doesn't look good. So that was the initial inspiration. And this was also one of the references we had gathered that was kind of based on it as well. So this was something I had really put off. Notice that I had rendered most of the character kind of all the way through. You know, of course, right, minor lines like this where, you know, it does require a bit more tune-up. Most of the characters in place, but I really struggled to touch on the tattoo until this particular stage, where I decided I'm just going to spend the whole day painting this and see where this turns out. And fortunately, I was able to come up with something that's hopefully that is reasonable enough, right? So this was the result of my hard work. I decided to, rather than go for a more, you know, flower type of design that is a bit more, you know, direct from reference, I decided to go with something a bit simpler for me to manage, and hopefully something that's interesting as well. So we have this sort of flower motif on the main shoulder on the top of the shoulder area here, and then we have these smaller flowers adding a bit of color accents. And for the snake itself, as you see in a lot of these Japanese tattoos, and I think nowadays in lots of different styles of tattoos, we have this sort of fading ink gradient that I wanted to use for the snake as well, because I wanted to create an effect that wasn't too heavy like what we had here. So this was the kind of the final design that I had gone for. So once again, right, as I also disclaimed in the class, I'm not a tattoo designer. I don't mean to pretend to be one. So this was really just kind of a way to do a very basic rendition of a concept and try to bring it to life. So maybe this could be a lesson on maybe I really do need to spend more time studying these things before committing to them. But it could also be a lesson on, hey, you know, sometimes just go in and enjoy. And once again, this is one of the messages that I always tell you guys about. It's important to be able to hop into a drawing, attempt what you want to do, because in this scene I was attempting a lot of things, different things, like drawing these things in detail. Now the last time I drew a convenience store type scenario, I had nowhere near the level of quote-unquote brain power. Not because I'm saying that because I don't really have a better word, but you know how as you draw more, you're able to handle more complex scenes, right? So it's been a while since I had drawn a scene like this, so I did want to challenge myself as well to see how far I could go. So the final results was something that I was semi-pleased with, as always, right? Because as you can see here, once again, after this rendering stage, we are past the toughest part. Here, things are a bit more locked in. I'm a bit more comfortable just working on various elements of the background. You know, still kind of, you know, a bit more of a confidence shaker, because sometimes you're feeling like, can I really draw this area in detail in a way that is just as reasonably attractive as this current sketch, right? The good old, I'm not sure if I want to render it thing, even though you definitely want to. Yeah. So as we finally go from this stage and then finally to this finishing stage over here, I just had a lot of fun as well, right? Finishing up the scene as a whole, using patterns, more on that in the class as always. And I'm pretty happy with the result. So some of the things I'm most happy with is, strangely enough, drawing the hand of the character here on the waist. This one was a difficult thing to draw, because sometimes you look at hand poses and you're like, yeah, you know, surely nothing will go wrong. I'll just get 5 fingers, get a palm in the right place. But then sometimes we need it to wrap around the character's waist. You need the fingers to be at an angle to show that sort of pressure. For example, if you're resting your hand on your hip, there's going to be a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but there's some amount of pressure, like keeping your hand there. So being able to show that, that was something that I struggled with, and I'm happy that I did a decent job at the end of the character's hand here. Another thing I'm happy with was the environment as well, right? These clearly took a lot of time, a lot of effort as well, and, you know, to showcase to everyone the entire process as well was, you know, a challenge, because I had to keep on target. And it's not a complaint. Once again, it's not like a complaint that, you know, woe is me, you know, I signed up to, you know, create a class and I'm complaining about it. No, of course not. But it was a challenge, right? Because to really focus in and to express the concepts at the same time as painting, it was a challenge that I haven't really been, you know, challenged on before for Patreon, right? Because for Patreon, because of you guys being super forgiving of my sometimes, you know, a bit more my hazy explanations and all that, and maybe just doing after the fact works, right? I haven't really done a lot of live painting except for that mega 8-hour tutorial that we also have. But right, this 40+ hour tutorial is on a whole nother level where it was quite a bit of an eye-opener for me to be able to, for example, like painting in these details here to tell you guys, oh, so this is how we decided on a certain thing, right? This is how we decided, you know, this thing was gonna go, and all that kind of stuff really kind of brought about quite a big challenge, I would say. And yeah, I think finally as a finale, the challenge was, you know, finished up in a satisfactory way. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this scene turned out. So once again, right, if you have any specific questions to the scene, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I'll try my very best to answer them for you. And for now, let's move on to the next scene. And here we are in the next scene. So for this particular scene, right, in this third scene of the set, what I wanted to do was to kind of showcase the more of the store, because this was in my mind, right, this store is a pretty interesting location. It had a bunch of different items, and so far, even though we have showcased it a little bit in both scenes, or both of the first scenes, or rather the first two scenes, we haven't really explored it in depth and detail enough. So in this kind of director's commentary, I do want to talk about how this scene came to be. So of course, right, ideation stage, as I will show in the class aside, this stage, or rather this particular scene, was an idea that I did want to showcase the character's full body in a way that is less distorted by either cropping or perspective distortion. I just wanted to showcase the character and the scene in sort of this very matter-of-factly way, but with that interesting unique touch to it, where you have weapons on the shelves, right? We can have like a mix of toys on the shelves, short swords, we have lanterns, right? It's kind of like a mixed sort of convenience store that has a bit of a strange side to it. So this was the idea behind this particular scene, and a quick rundown of the process as always, where we explore where we in the class spend many hours exploring each of these stages. For now, right, I do want to talk about some of the challenges and favorite parts of each stage. Well, my mouth is getting a little bit dry. So for this first process here, right, it's not quite the very beginning of the scene, but I thought I wanted to share this particular point in the drawing to kind of talk about something interesting here. So drawing a character from a different angle is honestly really hard. It's not necessarily because you don't know how to do it, but it's difficult to arrive at a scene or at a result that you want in a quick manner. Well, that's the sentence, right? It's difficult to arrive at the exact result you need in a quick manner that you can do so confidently. Because as you can see here in the very first scene, right, this particular perspective, it's a top-down perspective. It has that sort of interesting, vibe to it. That's all great, but the character is really out of perspective. Like, look at the length of the character with her giant legs and a tiny upper torso, right? But at this point in the drawing, right, because we're unfamiliar with the perspective, it only feels a bit strange. You don't know exactly what's wrong. And this is one of the things that in the class I touched on as well. But interesting enough, right, this is one of those things that we do talk about a bit more on the Patreon, which is the difficulties, right? So here's another difficulty for you. The perspective here on the character is off. Now, sometimes that could be an easy fix, right? Hey, we see a character here. A very quick demo here, right? Well, we just scale down the lower body of the character. Kind of make sure the perspective is in place a bit more, right? Something like this, right? Problem solved, right? We have the character in perspective now. Everything is fine. Maybe you want to adjust it a bit more, a bit of the middle ground, something like this, right? Very roughly something like this. So maybe that will solve our problems, right? Even though my quick demo didn't seem to work out particularly well, so ignore that. But either way, right? The point is that sometimes it's difficult to quickly correct the pose to exactly what you need, especially if you have a whole scene riding on it as well, in perspective. So I continued to, in the next stage, where I added in some local colors for the character, while fleshing out the entire drawing as a whole, right, in terms of lighting, in terms of basic design, right, a lot of things going on here. And then I added in even more colors for the setting as well. So this is pretty much the point in time where I started to see the scene more as a whole. And this was also the part where I realized that the character is way too out of perspective. So at this point in time, I had two ideas I could work with. One is that I correct the character, or two is that I correct the scene. So what I decided was that, with a lot more work in the background, right, really figuring things out, was that the character, I wanted to show the character in a way that was less distorted. Because we already had this, high angle view of the character in scene A, right? That was what we did. But in this scene, right, I didn't really want to have the same angle again, so I wanted an angle that's a bit more neutral. So for this, I decided to correct the environment. So as you can see here, subtle as it may be, the perspective has changed, right? Rather than this extreme top-down view, we had gone with something that's a bit further away that gives the character a bit more room to play with. So even though the character looks a bit taller now, right, it still looks kind of way too tall. Once again, right, drawing perspective, or rather drawing proportion is something that is embarrassingly not one of my strong suits, especially from unfamiliar angles. But this is the first part of the correction where we tune the scene to something that fits a normally framed character a bit more. And then this is all where the color lighting comes in, right? This was also a fun part of the scene where I had a good bit of fun working in all these different elements, seeing how they come together, and just, feeling the thing out, feeling the whole scene as it goes out, while severely dreading the need to eventually tackle this area here. Like, my goodness. Whew, this area here. Honestly, during the actual painting process, it wasn't as much of a pain as I had expected. But once again, this kind of level of detail to match that, it's something that's pretty daunting for me. So, but I did want to challenge myself. I wanted to give the class a good showing. So I decided, well, we're gonna stick with this. And so in the next scene, we did a lot of rendering to get into this stage. And because of my lack of experience, let's say, in drawing this sort of super dedicated, high detail scenes, I wasn't able to include as much variation, as much chaos as I would like. Because with characters, right, I have a good amount of technique on, let's say, varying some cloth creases, allowing the hair to flow a bit more wildly. All those things, fine for character drawings, I know how to do, how to do them. But for environment drawings where it's super complex, I really struggle with the complexity part of things, right? Where I wanted to allow things to be, let's say, a bit more chaotic, but rather we ended up with something that's a little bit more fixed in a way. But, I still like the results. I think it turned out pretty decently well. And yeah, it's something I'm proud of. And importantly, we had also corrected the perspective on the character, right? Notice the correct proportions. Because initially, right, while struggling with this scene, I really wasn't sure how exactly to do it. But sigh of relief when I started, really focusing on the character. Also helped by the fact that we have very specific sort of structured class setup, in a sense that we tackle varying parts of the scene in varying chapters. So in the character chapter later on, I really focused on fixing up the perspective on the character, how the character fit in with the environment, how the environment, on the other hand, fit in with the character, and how all these things kind of work together to create a scene that is, a lot more enjoyable to look at. So this is the final product. We have some interesting elements on the shelves. We have products filling the fridges in a plenty. We have goods laid out everywhere. And the scene was just something that was so satisfying to finish. Like, honestly, to be honest, I feel like if I had more time, perhaps I could create a scene that's a bit more exciting in a way. That's a bit more hype, almost, right? With a lot more creepy elements, a bit more chaos, and all that. But, this was a challenge, and I was kind of proud to be able to showcase this to everyone via the class, right? The full painting process. And it was a sigh of relief that when I reached this particular stage, that things were going well enough. I was like, okay, so this really challenging scene, I was able to execute, 80% of my original vision, right? We still had a high angle shot of a character with significant amount of perspective distortion, right? Indicating a bit of a close-up camera. We have the scene kind of laid out like this. And yeah, very satisfied with how this scene turned out. Hopefully some of the interesting things I shared here in the form of a quote-unquote director's commentary is helpful to those who've already listened to the class, perhaps, or watching this video pretty late. Yeah, hopefully this one acts as a bit more director's commentary. And for those who have signed up for the class or are a bit torn between, hopefully this also kind of serves as a bit of a preview into, what kind of processes are involved, and that could get you interested in learning more. And of course, right, for those of you who do want to learn more, well, the class is, has been recorded, it's already done, and yeah. So once again, right, a really, really fun, very challenging thing that I had pushed myself very hard to finish. And yeah, honestly, looking at this, even though maybe this is not, like, in terms of excitement factor, the most interesting drawing ever, I'm really happy with how this turned out, and my personal sort of brainstorming and all that had gone into this, very satisfying for me personally. So yeah, let's hop over to scene D, the final scene, and wrap up this Buns really quick but hopefully insightful director's commentary quote-unquote video. And once again, right, for this particular scene, if you have questions as well, feel free to ask them below. I'll try my very best to answer them. And yeah, let's move on to the next and final scene of the set. And here we are at the final scene of our illustration set. So once again, right, this is the basic process breakdown, and I do want to talk about something interesting, very specific to this particular scene, because honestly, this was one of the scenes that had me scratching my head of all time, right? One of my all-time most head-scratchiest scenes that I've had in a very long time. And let me just kind of begin. So initially, we had started off with a pretty simple concept. I just wanted to draw a character kind of hanging out with the cat. Recall in scene C and scene B, right, we had introduced the character to the cat. In scene C, right, the cat comes out for a direct confrontation, and in scene D, they're chilling and having a meal. So this was kind of the simple story that I was going for. And for this particular scene, right, I just wanted the idea front end simple. So what could go wrong, right? What could go wrong? A simple idea, a character having a simple meal with a cat, outside the store on a rainy day, very sort of relaxing mood, very, the kind of setting you will see in those lo-fi YouTube videos, very casual stuff. So yeah, I was kind of happy with the layout of the scene initially. And of course, right, I wouldn't proceed with the sketch and the scene if I felt like it was something wrong, because I really liked it. So we have gone over to the lighting stage, we're gone over to the value stage, and this particular part of the process was, it was pretty fun. I actually, at this point, I would say this was my most quote-unquote confident drawing of the four, right? Because if you take a look at the previous ones, at this particular stage, well, the perspective is just wrong, right? And the environment itself wasn't a bit too much of a strong perspective before we sort of started adjusting it. For scene B, right, yeah, for this one, I would say we're in a decent enough spot. However, right, once again, right, lots of question marks regarding the background here, right? How do we exactly do all these? So for scene D, I thought I was in for a good time, and I thought I had received a good blessing because, well, the scene seemed simple enough. We basically had, the main idea of the character and the cat laid out, with the help of reference, as always, right? I always want to remind people that reference is amazing. It gives you information on a scene that you otherwise would really struggle to draw. It expedites a lot of processes, and once again, as we're going to find out very soon, it doesn't take away the thinking. It just gives you information on how to draw things accurately, and then you have to start using your brain from there on. So, with the help of reference and with a scene design that I was happy with, I was very confident with this setup. Now, this is where my troubles begin. I say troubles in a way that sounds kind of bad, but honestly, it's kind of like an opening of the mind in a way. Because for this particular scene, when I reached this particular stage, I kind of started to get a bit worried. So, yeah, the concept was fine with the character, with the cat, but I was a little bit worried about the setting. Because we had a shot before, right, that was kind of in this very dramatic lighting setup that I enjoyed. But in this particular scene, what was happening was that they were outside the shop. I was making use of the silhouette of the character, which is, once again, right, as I always like to say, is a very good tool. So silhouette aside, right, and the scene otherwise is fine. But I was starting to get worried about this entire area behind the character. How do we feel it? How do we feel it? Excuse me, because they just felt like there wasn't quite enough depth to accord it the right sort of complexity that I felt like it needed. So this was something that started to bother me, and at this stage, right, I was once again kind of encouraged, using a different color here, I was a bit more encouraged by the fact that, hey, like, we have the different colors in, we have the warms, we have the cools, the very basic stuff. So I was kind of happy with this one at this point, because I was like, yeah, I've got my confidence back, right? We've got the cools, we've got the warms, easy to set up color scheme, compared to this one where I was still struggling with the layout of the colors. Do we want a warm environment? We're still struggling with that for scene B as well, right? I was kind of struggling painting the character in more complete detail, right? That was a bit of a difficult part of the process. And yeah, so this entire of the four scenes, right, once again, this one has become kind of like a quote-unquote relaxed scene where I was pretty confident on how this will turn out. Now, this was kind of where problems began. As I started to sharpen things up and adjust the scene a bit more, I started to realize that, hey, if we're drawing the character from this sort of close-up view, right? If you're drawing a character from this sort of close-up view, if we are placing ourselves at this point, at this exact point in the space of the scene, the perspective of the surroundings are a bit off. So that was one of the, that was one of those like hammer blows almost to my confidence. And of course, right, I've been through these scenarios before, and hopefully my experience here is going to help you guys a bit more as well if you ever face the same scene. Or not the same scene, but the same sort of problem, right, where you have a scene that you're confident with, but suddenly, right, you feel like, oh no, like there is big trouble. A lot of things are not falling into place exactly as I want them. For example, as you can see here, right, I started working and figuring out that, hey, if you're looking at a character from close up, the far away things are going to be in frame as well, right, and they're going to appear small. So I'm going to include all these different shutters, the reflection from the streets, right, really good things. Still confident. But the issue started to begin when I started to look at this close area near the character. Excuse me. So near the character is where the issues begin, because the character is sitting ostensibly on this step, right? And then behind the character are a bunch of air conditioner units. And then behind that, it's store. So this was a really quick jump from character to store, making this area seem a little bit flat. And an issue with that also was that with this type of background, right, the light might actually spill onto the character's face as well, right? A lot more onto the character's face as well. And if, let's say, we wanted a light to come from directly behind the character, right, in that case, right, this part will be a lot more in shadow, right? Something I didn't really want to draw that way, because one thing I still love is the thumbnail of this overall setup. I like how the thumbnail showcases the character very well. If I'm taking a look at the top right here, or if I zoom out, I love how the thumbnail showcases the pose very, very well, and the character very, very well as well. So yeah, this was something that I was adamant to stick to. So in this sort of final evolution, right, a lot of details are rendered out, of course, right? I'm not going to badger you guys with that in our director's cut, quote unquote, the director's commentary. What did happen was that I decided to extend the scene a bit more, right? Rather than having this sort of setup here where things just cut to the background, I decided, hey, why not have a bit more, right? Why not have these steps over here leading up, right? A couple of different steps, giving the character a bit more space to sit below while the rest of the scene, kind of shows up pretty small, pretty squished, not really squished, but just kind of small, right, up here, right? So we can have things in perspective, and we have this sort of size variation that also adds to the scene. We have the character that is very big, but we give the character a in-universe, in-camera reason to be this big. And that is because the camera is close to the character, and as a result, everything else being far away, they're going to be a lot smaller in scale. And with this sort of correction, we're able to do it. So this was kind of my sort of redemption for this particular piece, which initially began with a pretty confident start. I still like the thumbnail, but here I realized that, it's going to be a bit tough working in the rest. But after quite a bit of hard work and rendering, a lot of it was in one of the chapters, and one of the later chapters where we were figuring things out, right? Because the plan was that I wanted to showcase, ideally, a perfect setup, a perfect, reference research stage leading into a perfect drafting stage, leading to a perfect coloring stage, and a perfect rendering stage, and then a perfect polishing stage. But things don't work out that way. I kind of knew that it wouldn't, right? But, I wanted to have a good amount of structure, which I think turned out well for the class. But what that also meant was that inevitably we'll run to a place where you have some troubles you need to solve even later on in the stage. So yeah, during one of the later chapters, I showcased a lot of the painting transforming this scene to this scene, and what it took to really just figure these things out, right? How to extend the scene in a way, what to consider, and yeah, all that kind of interesting stuff, right? How do I paint the details imprecisely? All that is in the class. But in this kind of commentary, I do want to mention that this is one of those situations that if you find yourself in, firstly, don't think about the time pressure, because it might take a lot of time. So this is one thing that I don't have a perfect solution to, but if you can get over the fact that, hey, there might be a bit of time pressure here, and they're going to have to deal with it because this is going to take up a good amount of time, is that you want to start organizing the scene, you want to go back to basics, you want to kind of have faith in a way. It's kind of a strange way to phrase it that way, but you kind of want to have faith in your own skills, right? Because if you're able to draw a complex scene, means you can draw a complex scene, right? There's no such thing as, oh, I drew it once and I really understood what that scene was about. I figured it out in terms of fundamentals. I feel I can't do it again. Don't worry, you can definitely do it again. So if you feel like, let's say, a scene isn't really living up to what you want it to be, feel free to repaint it in a way that, let's say, straight away when I came back to this scene, I immediately extended it. For example, started painting the lower portion here, included more steps. And then when I had drawn the first step, I was like, yeah, that just doesn't work. We need more. So more steps coming in. The distance between the background and the character is being pulled out a bit more, right? Changes in perspective, and painstakingly transforming this scene into this one, right? Where we had a character that's a bit more separate from the shop in a way that is good, right? Because it allows the proportions due to perspective to shine a bit more. So this was something that I'm pretty happy that I made a change with. And yeah, in the director's commentary, it sounds like a bit of a venting session on how tough this was, but really, right? If you guys run into something like this as well, you really feel like you spotted something wrong in the scene, I feel like if you have the time, and ideally you should find the time to just correct it. Take your time, draw what you think is correct, check it out. Is it correct? Chances are, right, being able to draw the first part of the scene in a way has opened your perspective up to, well, literally perspective, as well as a bit more understanding of the structure of the scene, and that's going to allow you to propel yourself from there and have a lot more of a smoother process finishing up the rest of the drawing. So fortunately for me, even though it took a bunch of time to make this sort of jump, once again, very much demonstrated in the class, but very much also focused on some of the more decision-making types of, more of the decision-making that goes on. But yeah, so hopefully my explanation here today, my commentary on my 4 illustrations have been insightful, have been fun to listen to. One thing I did learn from the class was to kind of speak in a bit more of a vibrant tone. Hopefully this is carrying through to these as well. Maybe for you guys who haven't heard me in like 50 hours of recording, I sound a bit more lighthearted, hopefully. Sometimes, before this, I always tended to have this slightly more somber tone. I tended to slow down a bit unintentionally. So hopefully this is an upgrade as well for everyone who may not join the class, that I just speak a bit better after it. So yeah, hopefully today's video, this particular video, has been an interesting one. It's a bit different from the usual because I didn't want to honestly overshare. They've been really kind to allow me to share the full-size image with you guys, even though this is kind of a commission. But yeah, right. And as well as this video to kind of break down some of the interesting parts of these drawings, to tell you guys, what are some of the fun parts I really enjoyed, and hopefully, share some experience as well. So for this bite-sized video, hopefully this one has been interesting and helpful, and as always, thank you so much for your support here on Patreon. It really means the world. Could not do this without you guys, and I really, really appreciate it. And in return, I'm going to really be focusing on more character content, drawing my characters a lot more, developing them a lot more as well, right? Character concept art, all the interesting stuff. A bit of a different flavor from the usual, but hopefully you guys will find that interesting as well. So yeah, look forward to that. I'm actually, I'm taking some time off from drawing that to record this particular segment, this particular video for you guys. So yeah, I'm going to head right back into it. But once again, thank you so much for supporting me here on Patreon. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, this is the process breakdown for this month's set. And of course, accompanying class, once again, is linked below for those who are interested. Thank you so much for supporting me here on Patreon for the final time. I know I've said it a lot. But yeah, thanks again. And I hope to see you next month, very soon, for a lot more new works. Yeah, very excited. So once again, thank you and bye-bye.